Okay, greetings all. Thank you for the latest edition of CREE Talks, and today we are talking about the right business system. And as always, we have an illustrious group of panelists today, starting with Andrew Waugh, Alain Waha, and Ryan Straub. Perhaps, Andrew, if you can go ahead and give us a brief introduction to yourself.
Sure, thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Andrew Waugh from Waugh Thistleton Architects. We're architects practice in London in the UK. And for the last 20 years or so, we have been designing, building, thinking, dreaming about timber buildings.
Very good. Alain, your turn.
Hi, in less than 50 words, I'm Alain Waha, originally from Belgium, digital agitator that landed in construction in 2006 for disclosure purpose, and so that all my comments are seen as my own. I'm also CTO at Bureau Happold Engineering, who is a global engineering firm, mobilizing CREE systems sometimes, and digital working group co-chair at the UK Construction Innovation Hub, where we are inventing other systems.
Excellent. And you never looked back, which is also very good. Rainer, how about you?
Hello to the audience. My name is Rainer Strauch. I'm a construction engineer in construction business since 25 years. And from 2009 on, I deal with the CREE and the lifecycle tower system. And now I'm the managing director and responsible for our international operations.
Very good. Thank you very much, all three of you. Perhaps, Reinhard, if I can go ahead and pose the first question to you. Mm-hmm. We had some initial talks about what this CREE talk should be about. And I think it would be very interesting for the audience to find out directly from you what your impetus was. What keyed you to actually go ahead and start this particular CREE talk for today?
Good question. I think most importantly, we want to display that we not only have invented a building system, but we also constantly challenge what we have invented by ourselves and try to get as much as possible input from people who might have dealt with other systems, who think about systemized timber-based construction in a different way, in their own way, and which most of the cases is also a good way. And yeah, we want to position ourselves as a company that not only challenges the status quo when it comes to conventional construction, but also when it comes to everything that is new and forward-oriented, still needs to be questioned sometimes, including our own system. So that's what this talk is about.
Mm-hmm. And I think you picked two very good candidates to go ahead and challenge you. And I'd like to go ahead and start with Andrew, because I really enjoyed when we first had a chance to talk and you brought up the subject of sustainability or FOSS, sustainability, or whatever way we want to call it. Perhaps if you can tell us, especially looking at the realm of sustainable construction, what are some of your big concerns?
Yeah, sure, Mike. I think what we were talking about is the idea that you can kind of, that we can carry on as normal, you know, and put a solar panel on the roof or give ourselves a bit more insulation or some double glazing. And then, you know, everything will just be exactly the same as it's always been. And we don't have to really worry too much, you know, and certainly to my mind, a lot of these kind of, you know, awards and medals that we run ourselves ragged trying to achieve, like LEED and BREEAM and all of these sorts of things, you know, it's just a kind of carry on as normal kind of mentality. Whereas actually what we require in this situation, in my view, is transformational change. You know, we need to be rethinking completely the way that, not only the way that we design buildings, but the way that we purchase buildings, the way that we build buildings, and how we kind of like, and really I think how we view success in architecture needs to be completely reappraised.
Well, I tend to think that the idea of architecture or construction is part of something much grander. And I remember us going more in length on these particular subjects as well. Alain, you mentioned in our initial talks about some fundamental elements that were missing that do not allow us to actually go ahead and reach a certain level of maturity. So perhaps maybe if you can talk to us a little bit about some of your thoughts there.
Sorry, did you address that question to Andrew or myself?
No, to you, Alain.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, down here. Oh no, here, this way. I'm having a problem as well, but I know.
Certainly, I think it is worth trying to restate the problem and recognize, as Andrew is doing, that we stand atop of a system that's evolved through 5,000 years or so of making. And central to that approach, everywhere you look, is the instruments and the technology that we had at hand, which were our hands, a bit of mechanization, and our brains. And so, everywhere you look at how we deliver building, how we procure building, it's organized around that. Your Hoyer stages in Germany or the river stages in the UK are actually structured around information delivery that sits into 1 to 100 or 1 to 50 or 1 to 5. The way we've tried to deal with the increasing complexity of the building and the built environment has been to move away from the master builder concept towards a specialization, and then we get people that cut up and then say, oh well, you don't just reintegrate the building as a master architect, but now there's going to be a structural engineer, and then there's going to be and then there's a sustainability engineer, and then there is an acoustician, and then there's an interior designer, etc. And we've disaggregated thing using tools we had at our disposal to handle that complexity, which was a piece of A4 or A3 or A0. And that's led us to where we are, which is, not in a very pleasant place. Where I don't think the buildings we make work, and they are the major contributor to a planet unsustainable climate emergency. So, it is right to go back through to fundamentals.
And Rainer, I saw you nodding your head in agreement to what Alain was actually saying. And I think that when we look at some of the construction, I thought it was very interesting talking about all the players that we have on board. When we look at the concept of vertical versus horizontal partner integration, to what degree do you think that plays a role into that of what the issue that we're talking about here?
No, I mean, the difference, how I see it between vertical and horizontal connections is like in a vertical world, there is some individual or some entity that controls all the rest. And for some companies, some with some bad luck in the past, this has been kind of the solution for everything. So they were set up to control the entire process from project development to commission to operation, but some of them were not very successful with that. Horizontal integration is more like creating networks, and CREE clearly prefers that way for several reasons. I mean, of course, the downside is you cannot as much control the players as you can if they are all under your contract, right? But you can react much more flexible to local specialties. You can operate all around the globe because you easily establish local networks right from the existing network that you already have. And this is why we favor horizontal collaboration, or collectives as we call them. That the reason why I nodded to what Alain said was like twofold. So on the one hand side, I thought, okay, yeah, true, so many players, high complexity, and we of course try to simplify the whole building setup a bit by doing building systems. but I'm not even sure, and maybe I give this question back to Alain, if this is the way. Do we actually even have to simplify it, or do we just have to use different tools or different processes?
Yeah, I think you make 2 points, right, around, the integration, reintegrating the process so that it's end to end, whether it's horizontal, that reintegration, and whether that reintegration is done as a single company, which you describe as vertical. And we know the kind of companies, that deliver houses, a great example of a vertically integrated companies is companies that make laptops or cars. And then a horizontal integration was an ecosystem, and you try to reconnect the ecosystem. And the great example of those kind of companies are companies that deliver mobility rather than cars, where they're connecting cars, customers, and drivers, and we call them Lyft or Uber. And then within that context, then what are the needs for integration? And I think that's where you can see that the person that's building a wall, and the way we put a brick because it's about the right size, about the right weight, and a human can carry it. And we got to where we got. But if you're saying, well, no, I've got exoskeleton that can lift full panels. I've got manufacturing systems that can actually make infinitely variable or fixed width panels that have a fixed point of integration. It doesn't need to be cement. Then you can start saying, right, well, that's really quite complicated in the built environment, because every panel is going to be different, because the architect is telling us, I think quite rightly, that diversity and context, reacting to context, is what makes the built environment successful. So we want every panel to be different, but we're going to need to be able to create a system that's a bit more efficient than bricks, that works with hands, but at the same time respects the built environment context. And so I think that's where we're heading.
At the end of the day, we need to come up with systems that recognize the entire life cycle, understanding that our goal has to be sustainability throughout the entire process. So I'd be keen on your opinion, Andrew, with regards to these different types of structures. Do you see one being more preferential than the other, especially if our goal is sustainability?
Sorry, different types of structure, you mean vertical or horizontal?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that probably the thing about the way in which we were just listening to the way in which kind of vertical integration is being discussed, then perhaps that doesn't allow in the same, for the kind of, for the contextual adaptation that perhaps a more horizontal kind of way of looking at things does. I mean, I just would, I think that, in order to change things fundamentally, you need really close collaboration. It's not a, I worry about these kind of models because there's this sort of notion that, you do your bit and then you kind of pass the baton to the next person, then they do their bit. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and actually what we need to be doing is we need to be getting together in a great big huddle and working out what the heck to do, in my view. And, one of the problems that we've had as a practice for the last 20 years is with engineers, because they're our best friends, and what happens is we draw something and we give it to the engineer and we say, what do you think? And they say, yes, hang on, I'll be back in a week. I'm just going to work it out for you. I'm just going to solve it. I'm just going to, I'm like, they're acting like problem solvers, like you've given them a puzzle. Do you know what I mean? Like you've handed them a kind of like an aesthetic Rubik's Cube and you've said, kind of come back to me, and we need to break that down so they're not problem solving, so they're designing, and that it's a collaborative kind of process of design where the engineers kind of, and we've had the most ridiculous kind of scenarios where the engineer said, well, of course, if you had moved it by 50 millimeters, then we could have lost half the columns in the building. But of course, we wanted to keep your design to be, when you're like, what? So I think that this kind of like, this more sort of collaborative kind of model of, where we're talking to manufacturers, where we're understanding our supply chain, where we're designing through supply chain, talking and discussing with engineers, that it becomes more seamless and less kind of baton passing as a model.
I really like that, because that then highlights the need for the system, because that's the language that the manufacturers start talking about. Because my system might be bricks and mortar, or my system might be panelized, and then let's stretch that and see what's the outcome. And then the second thing, really, in terms of that collaboration, is going back away from where we've ended up, where the client says, I want this, and then you've got this unidirectional information exchange. And remember that at every information point, it's expensive, and it's risky. And so, and we've got a loss of information. Like you drew something, but it was gestural, and it wasn't to those 50 millimeters somewhere there. But how do you transmit that? And actually, Rainer, your system would want to say, well, actually, there are places where, if you draw it here, there, or there, I love the example of the kitchen design, right? And how it spans scale and conversation. If you're going to design a kitchen space, and that there are some simple rules to follow, like if it's going to be a manufactured kitchen, it's going to be 30, 60, 90 systems. Don't draw something that's not a multiple of 60, 30, or 90 with 2 centimeter inserts for the endpoint, right? Don't build a space, or if you do, be really, really clear that there is a reason that you are moving away from that point of optimization, that all manufactured kitchen come out of that industrial process. I'm not saying that we must be cabinetized at 30, 60, or 90, if that word exists, but equally, why doesn't that information come back to you, Andrew? You can press against it. And the reason is you can't do that with pen and paper. It just doesn't exist. Right. And so that's where I'm saying, right, technology, you could do something for Andrew here. And then actually, then you have something to press against, and you really back to that, new medium for conversation.
Okay, we need to give Rainer a chance to retort here, please. But before we do that, I'd like to go ahead and speak directly to the audience and make sure that you are given the opportunity to go ahead and participate in this conversation. So please take advantage of the chat box. Take a look at the chat box. Feel free to go ahead and put in comments, and we'll make sure that you're included in this conversation. But of course, we need to give Rainer a chance to retort. Rainer, the stage is yours.
I just wanted to repeat what I heard. Is that you are saying that technology would allow us to communicate in a better way on a particular project? I mean, because you can, if you put everyone in like those big these big box design rooms where everyone works on the same problem together, you also create a lot of noise, and it does not necessarily lead to a better result. So what I understood from this is that if you have technology and you can do a lot of alterations of your design approach in a short period of time, and everyone could follow this in real time, that would probably streamline the process. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I think that's one use case. I think we need to be clear about the fact that the process was designed for a generation of technology, which we all use PDF. So what is it that when Andrew says, let's restate how we deliver, what can technology unlock? And I'm really much speaking in terms of the Construction Innovation Hub here, and saying, let's not just be half measure about it. And so, yes, if you want to understand the collaboration map and understand whether the solution is converging, you could ask technology to do that. I think managing complexity is really a big part of where computers are great, right? Computers are bad at creativity or knowing what's good or what's valuable for a human. But what they're great at is doing repetitive things. And for them, a big number, a small number, there's no magic into a single number. So they can be infinitely variable and abstract that complexity. So that's what you should give to the computers. And then come back to the human, and Andrew said, well, what do we unlock here? And I think one of the big things that we need to unlock is right now the information is structured contractually, etc., from the point of view of a client expresses a need, and then it keeps on pushing the information towards the intervention, and then the intervention happens, and then in fact our industry, let's not be too blunt about it, then runs away. The building's got its sterling price, and then everybody runs away and doesn't actually focus on what the building's delivering. But let's just detonate that bomb there for a minute, but come back to, but why were you designing for a context? You ignored the context, you ignored the manufacturing, you ignored the assembly process, ignore the system.
Maybe also the disassembly process, right?
Etc. There might be a different operating.
Yeah, that's kind of. Sorry, Mike, you were about to say.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure that Rainer is given an
opportunity. No, that's fine.
It's fine.
Please go ahead, Andrew. I wanted to ask another question also to you, but you go first.
No, I wonder. I mean, I think that we seem to be discussing kind of architecture and buildings in a sense that each one of them is this kind of individual project, rather than actually discussing the notion of a kind of, of a process and a product. And I think one of the beautiful things that CREE have done is they've actually gone out there on their own to talk about a building as a product, and to establish a vernacular, to establish a way of building buildings. Because, this kind of like, this idea that we have to have these kind of individual idea explosions every time we do a building, and that actually every building has to be different from every other building. That's not how our towns and cities have evolved over the centuries. They've evolved as kind of like collaborative learned experiences where they're products, be that the town, be that the kind of city mansion block product, the farmhouse product, those products have evolved within their context because they've been a kind of collaborative expression of a requirement, of a need, of an aesthetic, of a kind of cultural representation, and of a kind of specific brief. And this idea that we kind of like, every time we get a new building, we need to kind of huddle down in a vertical or a horizontal or a kind of hug, each different time. That's what's wrong. And actually what CREE have done, is to begin to suggest, well, actually, here is building as a product, and we can build like this and establish a vernacular of an office building, which will look thus, and I think that that's what's really exciting. And that's what we need to be doing, because this idea that, that architects somehow kind of like, pop stars, that each kind of individual one has to do something completely different from the other, is very much part of the problem, and it's not going to be the solution is that kind of celebrating the kind of individual, that sort of 1950s American advertising kind of architecture.
Would you agree that standardization and uniqueness are not two separate elements?
Well, you see, standardization, right? Standardization immediately makes us think, oh my God, no, not standardization. It'll be the same forever and ever and ever. How about incremental perfection, right? How about every time we do something, the next time we do it a little bit better? That's what we've learned to do over history, I think. And the kind of like, the cities that we all love are often really quite homogenous in terms of their architecture, and they're kind of, you see those incremental little pieces of perfection, where somebody like me has had the opportunity to spend a whole career deliberating on a windowsill, and making it the best windowsill ever. God, I'd much rather be doing that. So it's I think that this notion that by standardization we're just gonna get a sort of Soviet style kind of like array of boxes is also kind of I mean, that's the antithesis. But again, it's like it's certainly the kind of capitalist kind of American sort of notion of do it every time differently, and kind of which I think is not healthy. It's not healthy for society either.
I would like to ask a question to all of you. I mean, you are all kind of in construction business, and what I think is that people working together and staying together in teams helps promoting those incremental improvements and trying to like establishing a kind of standard, at least within a certain group of people. Because I believe, Andrew, you were referring to the past. I believe that like some cities and towns, some medieval cities and towns look like homogeneous because there was always the same people doing that stuff, right? There was no exchange between neighboring cities or neighboring towns or neighboring villages, because the people who created those buildings were all there and they did it over and over again, and they established a kind of standard. So that's how I would think about it. Nowadays, it's a bit different because you can literally work with everyone on the planet, and even some regulations, some legal obligations promote that. They tell you have to use a different entity for your engineering trades every time, because you need to tender it. Yeah? You cannot just point at someone and tell them, I'm happy with you, I'm going to employ you for the next structural design or fire engineering or acoustics. It's always going to be the same people. Then there is a regulation that says, no, you are not allowed to, because you need to tender that. So this is a bit counterintuitive, or it's even, it blocks us from like working together with whom we want to work together. That's my observation, and I'm not sure if you share it, Andrew and Alain, and even Mike. I mean,
I think we're talking about the flow to a certain degree, and also inspiration that we get from each other. Alain, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think the procurement topic is an interesting one. I think obviously, a private company can do much more than a publicly regulated one. And I think that needs to be explored. I think, for example, to address that specific topic within the UK market, we're saying, ultimately, publicly procured building can be specified to be to a system, and as long as there's a multi-sourcing of that system. And so that's what we're setting up. Ultimately, the UK government has no problem procuring IBM PC. And why I'm saying that is because actually they're not made by IBM, and everybody knows that it's not actually a single PC. So there is a system there where you get what you want, which is a computer on your desk. And so I think that's can create a system, and then in a market with it. But I think central to that, and the segue to what Andrew, I think, was saying around product is really central, right? And understanding what's happened with that product lens. And we should do, I think, two things. So let's not get worried about a thing that says, oh, because it's a product, it's going to be Vladivostok, right? Ultimately, it's going to be a product, therefore it's going to be a Lada. No. The economic and societal system produced the Lada, and it produced Vladivostok. But they had some ingredients of saying, let's build it out of systems so we get built things quickly. And what they failed is they're having that market feedback. And I think what's really interesting about that market feedback is, let's not go into observer bias, like all the houses look the same, and therefore they agreed that that was a good product. Maybe all the ones that were shaken by an earthquake were bad designs and disappeared. So we didn't actually build all the same. So you've got that observer bias to observe. And then I think there's a point of clock speed. We are observing a vernacular that essentially gets reinvented in the built world in around 1839 with the invention of the bicycle. So with the invention of the bicycle, people started moving. Until that time, 99+% of people were born, lived, and died within a radius of 30 kilometers from the birthplace. So there is no, you design something, you test it, you live with it, and you feedback. And population doesn't grow very fast, and we don't have to actually do very much. Then we get, a Renaissance moment, explosion, architecture happens, people travel, and we need to deliver at scale. Right? What's the feedback mechanism? How do we get what Andrew talks about, the person that observes the outcome, that engage in the conversation? How do we get that product feedback? What's a good product and what's a bad product? Oh, well, a good product today is the one that the developer that's funding the project managed to sell. Great. So you're going to have a great product to sell. Let's observe music. And one of my favorite analogy, if you do that, you get A&R companies deciding who is a great artist. She's blonde, she's got a nice view, I can promote it and I can sell the vinyl. Great. Is that great music? Not sure. Right? Then technology arrives and says, no, we're going to listen. Anybody can upload their music on YouTube, and then people will vote. And then suddenly the A&R people are running back to the artists that have been discovered by YouTube. What does that do in a product context and an architectural context? Restate the conversation, accelerate the feedback clock speed around products. Really exciting.
Andrew, your thoughts? We're going to hand the baton over to you to take up that of what Arlon has been talking about.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I'm just kind of I'm letting that percolate. I like that analogy. I think that, I think that is right. I think you're right, Alan. I think that that's where we need to be at. We need to get back to reframing our notions of success, to what we think about how we consider successful architecture. And your version of an A&R kind of music person is probably an estate agent, in the world of kind of construction and architecture, that are kind of ever calling for a different product, ever calling for, to sort of brand uniqueness or brand identity so that they can sell it, and I think that therefore you have a kind of, a kind of an architecture world that's dominated by competition rather than by being, good, competent.
There's an inherent problem with this model. You know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know, and you think you don't those things that you don't know that you know. And that really is what you described out. And I have to go back to what you were talking about, because that's precisely the problem. And then all estate agent that you were talking about, Andrew, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we have people that think they know what they're talking about and they don't.
Yeah. And I tell you what, I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. And you know what? And the buildings that we're building right now, obviously CREE accepted, are often generally really pretty awful. They're pretty terrible, these buildings that are going up in our cities. They're kind of they're made of thin kind of metal stud work and insulation and kind of stuff hanging off the end. If you got a sofa at half those tower blocks, and if you have a piano in your apartment, and you get a couple of friends around and you have a kind of, you have a bottle of wine, after you finish the wine, you can probably push the piano out the wall. These are not kind of these are not good buildings. We're not creating good buildings for our cities. And also, let's kind of rewind back to the kind of original point as well. The thing is that we're in a climate emergency, and we need to be acting like we're in an emergency, and when you're in an emergency, you kind of pull together, right, and work together. And that's what we need to be doing. So, and we need to be working together to get the most efficient solutions, and from efficiency, I'm still kind of, maybe I'm a romantic about that, but I think from efficiency comes beauty, and yeah, so let's reframe it.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're saying that, because collaboration and bringing people together is what our licensed partner network is about, and it's not only the people who are contractual partners. There's so many people involved in CREE projects, and they stick to us. They want to do more of that because they realize, okay, there's a certain repetition in it, and if I once get it, how it works, I can do it over and over again. It saves time. There's always good quality, despite of the fact that you save time, and that's why people want to continue to work with us. I want to.
And you try and make it better every time, Rainer? You try and make it just a little bit better every time you do it?
That's what I mean. You know, our parent company, Romberg, owns also a part of a steel reinforced concrete precast company, which is called Goldbeck. Some like mid-Europeans might know them. And they invented their system like about 40 years ago, and friends of mine worked there, and they say they improve, they still improve with every project, and they do millions of square meters, right? And this is that is what needs to be done. I mean, just simply because of the fact that the way how we do things changes a bit, like products change, you need to adapt to new solutions. New solutions come up, like tiny things like connectors, etc., and you can optimize your building every time, but you don't have to redo the whole thing every time, right? Good point. So
that's one thing, it's been critical about America before, just, kind of advertising kind of culture and stuff. But actually, when you do go to the States, and there's one kind of salt and pepper shaker, and it doesn't matter if you go to like McDonald's or to a really kind of, fancy hotel, it's the same salt and pepper shaker. And they've had the same salt and pepper shaker since the 50s, and it's good. It works. It's kind of a pyramid. It stands up, doesn't fall down,
China,
you screw the top on, you screw the top off. There are kind of like, there are some products like that, which we can just get really good at, and they're always going to change over time. They're always going to evolve with different kind of factors. But, I think that's really where we need to be heading.
What I'm a bit concerned about is the analogy with productization, and I hear this all the time. And of course, CREE is also compared with features of a product, building as a product. But isn't it like many people consider products or they value it just for their immediate purpose, and many people do not care how the product is created or what the product does when it has arrived there, the end of the lifetime, right? You buy a product for the moment that you use it. At least that was like this for a long period of time, and maybe that is the reason why we have some buildings where you can throw the piano through the wall, as you said, or push it through the wall, because and it's especially when you look at America, the US, I saw that, or in Canada, you very often have like beautiful spaces, because that's what people want. They want spaces. They want space with beautiful opportunities and good looking and nice surfaces. But behind that, and during the making of this and after the making of this, nobody cares about that. And this is a bit, to my understanding, the downside of if you look at something just as what it does as a product.
I'd violently disagree with that, having coming from the product world. Ultimately, there are two things that I think you want to consider around products. So you first, as soon as you say space as a product or building as a product, you inherit a lot of things, right? So you are saying this product, how does it perform? What's the value framework that I'm using to measure that performance? And then I'm trying to loop back into a stable process that's instantiating that product. Now, I know there's a little bit of all the products we see, we don't see the variability. But, coming from the automotive industry, the only thing stable in a car company is the factory and the process that makes your product. We give you a configurator, you configure the product. Now, there is no intrinsic customer value that make and allow you to change the length of your car. So we don't let you do that. However, there are things that are actually valuable to you that we give you a configurator. And so there's this conversation around the product, the process, a feedback loop, and understanding what's valuable to this person. And as soon as you do that, then, if you are making products that you can put pianos through, you can examine that and you say, why is that happening? Because the people have no choice. Why do the people have no choice? That's a societal question. But if you say, well, in Vladivostok, they had no choice, we know why they had no choice. And and we're laughing at it 30 years, or not maybe laughing at it, but we're quite clear and quite critical of the system that created Vladivostok, and we will be critical in 50 years of the system.
But that system had nothing to do with the process of.
Absolutely, the process is optimized to deliver that bad product.
Absolutely.
It's delivering ladders,
Yeah.
and then we put, and I'll hand over to you, and we put our value system. Do you think that Tesla is making electric cars because it didn't interview customers that wanted a more sustainable mobility and said that was more sustainable? They actually go towards the customer. The customer expect a zero footprint product. They expect that Volkswagen factories don't pollute river. They expect the car is 90% recyclable. Show me a 95% recyclable building, and I'll say bravo. I'll say show me a 95% recyclable product. I'll point at every car. So Andrew, I think industrialization of the process and the huge variability of the product will actually deliver sustainability for a start.
No, definitely. And I think that kind of, it's frustrating to see that things like, that how modular housing, how kind of prefabrication has been held back by that kind of notion that you have to kind of start everything from point zero, that every project has to be started as an individual project. Every building has to be started as an individual project, because I think that, what we should be talking about and what we should be getting excited about. And one of the things that I love about, if you look into architectural history and you look at the kind of, whether it's Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright or Charlotte Perriand, each one of those people, their careers are all kind of looking at lots of different things, and yet actually all end up in the same question, which is, should it be flat pack? Should it be modular? Should we do prefabricated facades, or should we have individual? And that's how all of those people all those brilliant people finish their careers, is in this one thorny question, like how can we actually take a notion of a modern architecture to where it should be, which is about kind of instilling this kind of process and quality into our buildings, something that's inherently low carbon as well. So, I think that, the way that thinking about, going back to the original kind of question about resource responsibility and resource efficiency, thinking about how we can use the materials that we have, in the most efficient way, has to be about that kind of prefabrication, and it has to be about kind of, constantly kind of getting better and honing your skills, and kind of like, it's like managing a football team, every time you win, the next time you got to win better,
I think to put it there, why don't we want to inherit those beautiful property of a stable manufacturing process around, I don't see 20% of the materials that we use to make cars being thrown out and then only 80% becoming cars. Now, a manufacturing process, by definition, in the right environment, produces very efficiently with resources and very aligned to what the ecosystem is ready to commit to. And so we need to advocate for a predictable assembly process of building, because that's lean, is less wasteful, lower, and then it's recyclable and is circular. And if the way to get there is to look at the category of building and say these buildings can be made through this process, then you've got the right system.
I haven't heard anybody use this word, but I hear you all saying indirectly you're talking about maturity. Or did I get it wrong? I keep hearing you all talking about a certain level of maturity that's required to make this work properly. And that would also include, Andrew, the whole idea of having the big picture of what we need to do, not just this individual building. And I'm kind of piggybacking on some of the things we talked about earlier last week. But we're talking about something much bigger, right? And that would require a certain level of maturity for us to actually be able to reach it. Or am I wrong?
Yeah, this needs to be driven by ethos. There needs to be an ethos behind this. It needs to be a kind of like an ethical, political approach to architecture, an understanding of actually what it is you want to do and why you want to do it. Not as I was saying before, this kind of notion of the idea explosion. Like, like I was sitting in a restaurant and I kind of sketched something on a napkin. So I gave it to somebody and they made it happen. It was like, awful,
it's a change in belief.
Reprehensible. Yeah.
I think it's a change in belief that it has to be, hand carved time. It's a change in belief that there is a manufactured process and a standardized process can create infinite variability that the architect will control. But that's a change in belief.
Yeah, or even better, Alan, the customer will control. It's like, when you buy your new car and you get your 1.5 million choice combinations, and your 6-year warranty, it's not going to go wrong. I mean, the opportunities, I'm not saying the outside of the building should be chosen by individual kind of, but the opportunity for somebody not to buy a white box, but the opportunity for somebody to buy something that's kind of bespoke, the interior is bespoke to their needs, it's definitely going to be, it's going to be more resource efficient way of doing things because nobody's ripping a bathroom out or ripping a kitchen out or repainting, and it's got to be kind of higher quality as well.
So it's about trust, right? Yeah. It's about trust. You also need to trust the product, and you also need to trust the people who create the product. And I mean, to me, like, I would also connect trust with brands. And when you talk about a brand, brands are usually like also connected to trust because people trust certain products because they are branded or they belong to a brand and they just believe the brand is good, so they don't have to check any detail of the manufacturing chain or of the supply chain anymore because they just trust the final result. And that's why we put a lot of effort in like creating this trust and giving CREE a trustworthy brand image. And what we noticed, and maybe you Andrew and Alan, you can correct me then, there is not so many brands in construction business. There's some architects who have created who have established their names or their studios as brands, or there are certain architectural styles like the Bauhaus, but a single brand is quite unique. So, but we believe that it's crucial to gain trust by customers, and it pays off in the meantime. We get a lot of requests just by mouth-to-mouth propagation, right? Because so people don't even know exactly what CREE is about, but they believe that it's a good thing. It will create a good result, and this goes way beyond the mere construction system, like the structural system or the wall system that is behind it. Is like it's much more human than just the engineering, the particularly good engineering.
I think it's really, insightful observation that when you talk about products and whether space is a product or building is a product, then you quickly get to this concept developed over many decades now of brand, which is a conversation between the consumer, your promise, and the level of trust you've delivered. And it's really interesting because the trust is what makes the customer believe in your promise, and therefore you can sell the promise. If Lada turns up and says, "I've invented the X5," do you buy it? No, I don't trust Lada to make me. I'm not in it for. But that conversation becomes a virtuous circle for value and for delivering a promise. So you're very explicit around your promise. You attract the customers that want that. That's brand segmentation and promise segmentation, and then you build the trust in your system, a repeatable knowledge system that iterates and continues. And it is interesting that in the build space there are brands, but they are brands around experience rather than around the building, right? And I think that's a really interesting. The one that was very much in the news and spectacular for me is WeWork. which was a brand promise of, if you want collaborative space and you want your business to thrive, come into a WeWork. And they delivered amply on this promise through properties of space and properties of architecture and a product-centric view of space and a lot of research on what the product is. And likewise, you've got the same brand promise around hospitality and a good night's sleep. But I think the one that's more technology enabled and architect enabled is that productization of space by WeWork.
Branding is
Absolutely
important.
agree.
It's predictable. And I think that's what you were talking about, Andrew. Sorry, I stepped in your words.
No, agreeing with Alan about WeWork, incredibly important and as a disruptor in the kind of office market. And you can see that all the commercial developers slightly adjusting their models now to be a little bit more kind of, landlord centric, where they're looking after people a little bit more and kind of providing, other, and also just seeing it how it's changing architecture, where you're kind of, where you're having kind of like larger open lobbies and kind of like, and then collective workspaces and then individually let workspaces. And you can see, it is absolutely really interesting. I think that, I would say to Rainer though, it's like, a lot of the most successful products in our life are those products where we trust the brand, where we trust the kind of the quality of that brand, but they're also where it allows us to also kind of imprint personally on that brand as well, where it allows us a little bit of kind of personal opportunity to influence and change things, to make it, to make it our own, as well as it being part of a kind of, of a kind of understood badge of quality. So I think that there's going to be, I think there's an opportunity to do that in modular and in prefabricated architecture, which is going to be really interesting in the next decade, to see how that kind of develops, because we haven't really understood the impact of, of sophisticated IT systems into design yet. At the moment, they're just facilitating rather than aiding. In most other fields, you can see that actually kind of, is that information technology has actually changed the way that those things are put together, and the way that it hasn't really happened yet in architecture in construction to the way that I think that it's feasible that it can. CREE are a good example of people that are using it in terms of parametric systems and stuff like that. But I think actually that's going to be really fascinating.
I wouldn't stop with like parametric design or using like 3D design software or software that allows full building information modeling. It's to us as a promoter of collective construction collectives and collaboration. It's also like the way how we communicate, and this is I must say this here. It was even to us as CREE, it was amazing to watch how we changed our way of work because of the pandemic. Yeah, so this now is about the pandemic again. Sorry for that, but it totally changed our approaches and enabled even like people who were completely not used to online communication. And I'm not talking about us, but our partners. They are now totally disconnected, or totally independent from the need to travel and the need to always be physical at one particular place. And that, to me, construction is a very physical thing and a very local thing. Yeah, you cannot just move around very quickly because your construction site is somewhere located, and people usually need to be there physically, because not yet you can build a building only with like touching your key, coding something, or using your keyboard. There needs to be some physical activity on site, but even that will get improved. So people are used to like physical interaction, but that changed to the better, I believe, also in the last 1.5 years, and that makes collaboration, global collaboration, even easier. even if you are not yet there and design everything, design your building or your digital twin all on a computer, which Alan certainly would like to see that we do this. But I mean, we also do conventional like processes with at least with online support and still a lot of physical activity.
But I think a system that has that, hybridization is really interesting because, if you've created the building to be flexible and circular, probably you can disassemble it. And if you just look at what happened in the last 24 months, it's sort of like, what do people actually want these buildings to look like now compared to, 2 years ago? I would bet that I'd want to reconfigure, the segment of early professionals. I think early professionals, certainly in cities like London, were really badly impacted. And you really think, we started from, working from home to living at work, but then that work home relationship where the space is ready. I mean, I'm in a flat share. That flat share has no communal space. What's going on? But we all have a kitchen, but why don't we have, if you look at the structure of society and how it could be reimagined, ask people, let's disassemble these buildings and reassemble them the way they would want to use it. 3 floors probably would go for shared kitchens, shared workspaces. I give away my lounge, but, examine how other societies evolved, around their climate, Balinese style, vernacular, or Vietnamese, which are my favorite example, around how, we are shoehorning them into our idea of a flat and a condo rather than saying, actually cooking is communal, cooking is 24 hours. So, the spaces need to be better. So, a system really unlock these kind of opportunity it's going to be unexpected what people can do with the system.
I'm afraid we are getting close to the witching hour. We have a few more minutes left to go. I'd like to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to give us some closing words, perhaps. Oh, sorry, we have a question coming from Jack Crocker. In the next decade, who is the most important target when it comes to brand? Developer, partners, contractors, owners, tenants? Anybody like to take up that subject?
I think if it's related to construction products or like buildings as products, I mean, now it's like the one who pays for it has the most control. This is still the case in the building industry, but I mean, maybe this is going to change, and the customer, like the one who uses the building, will have more influence. I mean, we see this partially already. Our latest project, the Südkreuz in Berlin, was very much influenced by the tenant, which is now Vattenfall. But the initiative still started with the developer, I must admit. So, however, it was already like a shared responsibility. They agreed, so that the developer and the tenant agreed on the need for that building, which was already a good sign. And I think in the future it might even more shift to the one who just wants to use the building, and not so much to the one who pays or who does the original initiative for the building. Would be a good thing, I believe.
Definitely. We need to get more customer focused, don't we? We need to kind of like be thinking about the people who are going to live and work in these buildings. That kind of like the 20th century idea of kind of like selling people a white box to live in, and a polystyrene ceiling tiled environment to work in, it's just not good enough. It doesn't work. Sad people is what you get. Sad people and bad cities. And, so there's an opportunity for change here.
And I won't disagree. I 100% believe the CREE is a consumer brand, and every brand in the built environment should be focused on the human. that that has the utility, the experience, the life transforming experience of that space. And I would go as blunt as saying that all companies, it's called in the digital world, and Digital Agitator would say this, it's called reintermediation. The person that manages the conversation between the consumer and the space is the person that ultimately has the control over the value chain. And that will eliminate, for example, developers that do not understand that we work, they're reacting. They've not seen the beginning of it.
Great.
Yes.
Alain, perhaps if we can leave it with you, if you can perhaps give us some party words from your side.
Who was it addressed to? Sorry,
to Alain.
I just said, I think digital distribution is gonna. I'd like to start where we, the right system, and that is a really important question. And the right system in the context of brands has to be the one that stands on the climate emergency platform and says, the only way we disrupt an $11 trillion industry is by standing on the number one platform that matters to all of us. Is let's stop burning the planet and let's look at how we use systems to create the spaces we need. And we need a lot of space. So let's focus on that. That's the right system.
And now I think this is the point where we need to mention timber, by the way, because I believe we haven't said any single thing about timber here, but of course this is something that contributes greatly to burning the planet less, as your phrase.
It's so blindingly obvious, though, Rainer, isn't it? It's so blindingly obvious that we have no choice.
I'm happy actually that it's at least in the back of me here.
We've been having a higher elevated conversation beyond the bleeding obvious. I think, Rainer, and it's like the bleeding obvious is that, we need to vastly reduce our use of concrete and steel and only be using non-extracted, replenishable, bio-based building materials. Mm-hmm. End of. No,
should be clear. Okay. You're totally right. Yeah. Don't need to talk about that.
I think these are our closing words, huh? Closing words for the session. I'd like to go ahead and thank everybody who attended, all of you, the audience, and of course our great panelists today. Hope you were able to come up with some added value from this conversation, and we look forward to the next rendition of CREE TALK. So again, thank you very much for joining. I'd like to thank again the panelists and look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Alain. Thank you, Mike. So good to see you. Bye.
Cheers, guys.